Wes Streeting took to Trevor Phillips's show and said that the biggest threat to Labour is the Reform Party. Let's check it out.
I think reform is definitely a real threat and one that we take seriously. I think there's clearly, on the right of British politics, a realignment taking place. It's not yet clear whether at the next general election it will be Reform or the Conservatives that are Labour's main challengers. But we've got to take that threat seriously. And in that spirit, I think Reform does deserve more airtime and scrutiny of their policies, because you mentioned the issues that Nigel Farage wanted to fight the local elections on. There were other issues like the NHS where he wilts in the sunlight of scrutiny. He says on one hand, he says people who can pay should pay. And then he says, oh no, but I still want the NHS. He says he wants an insurance system. But he doesn't say who should pay, how much they should pay.
Okay.
And that is a real threat to the NHS, and one I think we absolutely
Will you start to treat them now
as
as your most serious opposition?
I certainly do treat them as a serious opposition force. As I say, I don't know whether it will be Reform or the Conservatives that emerge as the main threat. I don't have a horse in that race, but like Alien versus Predator, you don't really want either one to win, but one of them will emerge as the main challenger to Labour at the next general election. But as the Prime Minister said in his article over the weekend, we see as the big issues and the big battlegrounds the economy, the cost of living, borders, and the NHS.
There's so much to unpack there, and it sounds awfully familiar to a certain side of the political spectrum. Some of you might criticise me, but I think that he's wrong. I think the biggest threat to Labour is actually Labour itself, and here's why. Recent polls have underscored that Reform's rise is less about Farage or Reform's brilliance as a whole, and more about Labour's failings. In one YouGov poll that shocked Westminster, put Reform at 25% ahead of Labour on 24%, the Tories at 21%. And although those percentages are marginal, it does say something. In short, Labour is offering Tory-light policies in a country that desperately needs bold change. It's pretty simple. Labour, you don't beat an insurgent by actually becoming them. But here's the irony. By steering towards the centre-right, Labour risks losing more voters on its left flank than it ever could to Reform. A new analysis shows Labour stands to lose twice as many seats to a mass defection of voters, the Greens or Lib Dems, as it would from a similar swing to Reform. So yes, Wes is wrong. Again, by chasing the approval of Murdoch headlines and right-wing focus groups, Starmer's Labour has left millions of working class and left-leaning voters politically homeless. Those voters can either stay home, turn to smaller progressive parties, or even hold their noses and vote for a demagogue like Farage. But because they want fascism, not because they want fascism in a pinstripe suit, but because Labour hasn't given them a compelling alternative. Lewis, we've just seen what's happened in the recent by-election and various local elections up and down the country. Why are people so convinced that new face means new system? And then we'll get into Wes Streeting in a little bit.
There is like a psychology that ties into this, right? And I think it's the same with Trump in many ways. I was listening to, I think it was Pod Save America the other day, and they were talking about Bernie, because obviously a lot of us like Bernie. He's got quite a few fans in here in the UK, but he was saying that people weren't necessarily voting for Bernie because he was offering all these amazing and great policies, and he's a big fat lefty and a democratic socialist. It's just because he didn't represent the establishment. And he was also comparing it to Obama as well. It's like Obama won, not just because he's a fantastic communicator, because he was a face that nobody knew. He came in and was just like, I'm new. I'm not part of this establishment. I'm not these, 30, 40-year senators. And I feel like it's almost the same for Nigel Farage. And, me and Curtis always bring this fact up that we've both met voters who will say, might vote for Green, might vote for Reform. And you're kind of like, what? Like, make that make sense. And it's just the idea of just voting for something different and voting for something new, not voting for the establishment in some way or another. Like, obviously, I would hold those people accountable who just want to vote for Reform for the sake of voting for something different, because obviously the policies that they're enabling and supporting are, bad and dangerous. But ultimately, people just want something different. And what's frustrating about these like clips of Labour and the direction that they're going in Wes Streeting is that instead of just saying, which version of what already exists can we be to try and win, instead of actually going down the path of how do we actually be different? How do we stand out? What can we bring to people that's different? What haven't they seen before? And even though I don't think Farage is necessarily offering anything new, I think he's just really good at, rewrapping it and packaging it in a maybe slightly different way. Labour are failing to see what they need to do, which is offer something different, because that is currently what's appealing to people.
A really great point, actually. And I think that this is the issue, isn't it? I think what Farage is good at is actually pretending to be a working class man. He emulates the, hey, I'm one of you. Look at me drinking a pint in the pub, and look at me with a helmet on for a photo op. Like, he's really good at emulating that. But if people actually studied the things that Reform was saying, and they would realize that they are basically, most of them, ex-Tory MPs who are very much, like you said, part of the establishment and don't care much about class solidarity or collectivism, but simply just about individualism. So going back to what Wiz Streeting was saying, he was obviously echoing a lot of those talking points. He mentioned borders. I remember borders. I can't remember much else, because I was just like, isn't that just a right-wing talking point? Like, it's so weird. So my question to you is then, is Labour at greater risk of defeat from its own lack of boldness and broken promises than from the Reform Party? So, like, in other words, has Starmer made Labour its own worst enemy by alienating its base?
Yeah, absolutely. When you obviously opened up the story, and the first thing that you said is obviously Labour's biggest enemy is themselves. As soon as I saw that interview with Wes Streeting, I grabbed my phone, made a video, and said the exact same thing. The biggest threat, not even to Labour right now, but to the country, is the Labour Party itself, because they are in the position where they could stop Reform from winning, and they're choosing not to. They think for some reason this plan is going to work, right? There's that paragraph that's kind of floating around between a lot of political TikTokers and social media people right now. It's like of Morgan McSweeney saying, so what we need to do in response to this election is become more blue Labour. And it's kind of like, okay, so how is doubling up on what's failed you going to work in any way? It just doesn't make sense. I think we talked about this on the last show. There was that recent data that came out that showed that around, I think it was 74 or 75% of Reform voters polled amongst around, I think it was around 4,000 or 5,000. They haven't voted for Labour in over 20 years, right? So I don't get why they're going after these votes. We know from data that the Conservative voters who either didn't turn up or fled, a lot of them went to Lib Dem, some went to Reform, some of them just didn't vote, and obviously some of them did vote for the Conservatives. Very few of those votes went to Labour. So who are they? I just don't get who they're actually trying to appeal to. All the data shows that they're losing voters to the Greens. They lost tons to independents. When I looked at the data after the last election, the amount of people who voted independent in this election was double what it was the year before. And then, the election before. And the election before that, which was 2017, I think. Yes, 2017. The independent vote doubled from that period. So it's doubled and doubled on each election. So people are just turning away and looking for alternatives. So why not chase those voters? It simply makes no sense. And again, they continue to miss like very easy opportunities of, populism in lots of ways. I feel like even though it is good to obviously do practical policies, I feel like sometimes you need to make room for things which are kind of superficial in a way, right? There's this perception that like MPs are greedy and they're just rinsing the taxpayer and they're spending all these monies on fancy dinners. Well, why don't you tighten up those rules on like how they can claim, right? Why is it that an MP can go to PMQs on a Wednesday, and instead of going to the taxpayer subsidized restaurants and food that they have access to in their parliament buildings, why are they going over the road to a nice fancy restaurant and then claiming expenses on that? And I feel like these types of narratives, you're kind of creating them and then clamping down on them. I feel like this is what people want to see. And I'm not saying that people should start just doing superficial things, but there are so many kind of like easy wins that they're not taking on, like denying the pay rise for the MPs. They were like, it's an independent body. And it's like, okay, independent bodies recommend pay rises all the time. And you've already said that the next time the independent body wants to do a pay rise for NHS workers or anyone else or teachers, you're not going to pay for it. So why are you accepting the MP's pay rise? Imagine the moment that Keir Starmer could have got up on a lectern and said, why are we going to give anybody a pay rise right now and who's an MP? We're earning enough money. Like, easy points to score, right? But they just continue to fail.
Yeah. And I think you made honestly such great points. And I think the only way to stop reform is for Labour to reform itself. That's the irony of it. I think they need to rediscover the bold socialist principles that they were once rooted in, that actually inspire the base and improve people's lives. Otherwise, this realignment that Streeting is talking about, that he fears is going to happen on the right, will be nothing compared, I think, to the realignment of the betrayed voters that decided Labour isn't worth their loyalty. But really great points, Lewis, and I want to go on to the next story because we've got quite a few things to get through.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.